Welcome. Thank you for logging on and attending this morning's program. My name is Matt Schumann. I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, I'm also in the library today. That's why I'm wearing the mask. But before we begin, please let me know if there are any technical issues that I can try to resolve. You can send those to me in the chat. We will be doing a 2-camera setup today, but we've been practicing, so everything should go smoothly. Any questions that you have can be sent in the chat, and Ed will answer them later. And this program is made possible by the generous donors to the Cary Library Foundation. I'd like to now introduce Ed Winters, a local coffee master. Ed has an extensive collection of brewing devices. He is an engineer by day, and Ed has conducted his own research into the perfect brew for years. Today, he will show us how to make cold brew coffee perfect for this hot weather. So please welcome Ed. There we go.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Yes, I've been an electronic engineer by trade. I've been doing that for about 30 years. I got into coffee for most of those years from college days. I started off with drip brews, went into mocha pots for many years, and then into espressos, and then finally, for the last 4 years, I've been roasting my own coffee, and that has just opened the world to just about any kind of coffees that there could be conceived. You want to pan the room, Pam? This is my coffee setup. I have a roaster over here. It does about two pounds of coffee at a time. I have my espresso machine here. It's a commercial unit. I love it. And then I have a bench where I can actually do all my work with brewing. So why don't you pan in on the screen? I have a couple of slides here, not as many as I had the last presentation. I want to get into some more hands-on this time. So I would like to start off with what is a cold brew versus an iced coffee. Iced coffees have been around for much longer time than cold brews. Cold brews, I think, have been around maybe 5 or so years, really strongly. Maybe they've been around before that, but that's what I know of. Iced coffee is when you brew hot coffee with a standard drip brewer, and you pour it over ice. And that does a couple of things. First of all, when you extract with a hot brew, you're getting all the flavors that coffee has to offer. Pouring it over ice tends to melt the ice, the melting of the ice tends to add water to the brew, and it tends to weaken it, so it's usually on the weak side. It also, it tends to be very fast to brew, which is actually a benefit. Cold brew, on the other hand, and it's not necessarily ice cold, brews the coffee with cool water, room temperature water. I put it in the refrigerator, that's the temperature it is. The cold water extracts less flavors, particularly the acidity that's in the coffee, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. The final brew has more caffeine because it does not extract as much. You need to use more coffee in the brew to start with, and so all the caffeine comes out, and it ends up being very strong. The brew time is a nice, convenient 8 to 24 hours. I typically never go to 24 hours. It's always in probably the 10 to 15 hour range, which is beautiful, right? You right after dinner at night, you set up your brewer in the fridge. The next morning, it's all ready to make your cold brew. So it's actually, because of the brew time being so long, and it's the way I do it, it ends up being not a very fussy way of brewing. If you're off an hour or two, if you're off when your grind's a little bit, it really doesn't matter. It comes out pretty good anyway. One of the main benefits, in my opinion, is it does not melt the ice. You take it out of the refrigerator, it's already cold, you pour it over the ice, you preserve that nice, strong, good tasting flavor. And then it stays cold. The ice doesn't melt. It stays cold, and you can sip it for a lot longer. So what coffees do you use in a cold brew? This is often a question I get. I mean, for any brews, you want to use nice fresh roasted coffee. Now, my typical go-to is it's been roasted within a week. Sometimes you can't get coffee that's roasted within a week, but that's general rule. If it's 2 weeks, you're probably still okay. But basically, nice fresh roasted coffee is going to end up with a better tasting coffee. There's a lot of coffees out there that have a lot of acidity. A lot of the really sought after coffees these days are some light roasted Africans, maybe a Central American geisha. You can spend a lot of money on coffees that have really good complexity and really strong acidity. Those are really not good for cold brews because a lot of the acidity does not come extracting cold. And so you might think you're going to end up with a fantastic cold brew with a fantastic, award-winning coffee. It's not going to be the case. A medium to dark roasted coffee is usually better. Coffees that have on the bag some flavor notes of lemonade and maybe some lime and grapefruit, probably not the coffees you want to have, because a lot of that is those fruity type flavors are acidity that's going into your brew with a hot brew. It won't come out with a cold brew, so try to avoid that. This second example down here is a fresh roasted baked gingerbread, brown sugar, honey sweetness. Some of those might come out really well, but the stone fruits and nectarine and peach, no, you won't taste those in a cold brew. So darker roasts, if you go really dark, a Starbucks dark type of coffee, they're going to extract a little bit quicker than one that isn't, a medium roast. And they're going to be very bold and strong. You may like it that way, but just be warned, if you'd rather have a lighter flavored coffee, very dark roast like a Starbucks is probably going to be too dark. Pete's Coffee has some nice brews that are mediums. Pete's mediums I still consider a little on the dark side. They usually make a pretty good cold brew. In terms of grinds, you really want to grind your coffee as coarse as you can get. I have a Bun commercial grinder over here. It's what you typically see in grocery stores. I put it on the coarsest setting it has. And as you can see in the picture here, it's relative to a drip brew. There's really pretty good sized chunks of coffee in there. And there's a good reason for that, because cold brews are typically brewed into in a sack, and there's no water flowing anywhere within around the sack. It's really hard to filter the coffees out of the grinds and into the solution. And so if it's really, really fine, the water won't get into the middle and pull out the flavors. So it really needs to be coarse in order for that to work properly. The other thing is the brew concentrate method. That's the method that I'm going to suggest today. And what it is you brew in a smaller container, a 4.5 to 5 to 1 by weight ratio brew. Now, here's a brewer right here I did last night. It has that ratio in there. This particular container will hold enough concentrate for 3 to 4 cups of coffee. Thank you, Pam. So once you get the concentrate and it brews properly, you mix it 50-50 with water to give it a nice, strong flavored brew. Probably if you're a beginner with this and you don't like really strong coffee, maybe mix it 1 pot concentrate with 2 pots of water and ice. Play with that a little bit. The important thing is to have a concentrate. And the concentrate does a couple of really good benefits over other ways of doing cold brew. Concentrate actually slows down, if almost stops the brew process as time goes on, which is really good. If you let it go a little too long, or 10 hours versus 15 hours, you probably barely taste the difference. It basically, the water that's in there as a solution stops extracting after a certain amount of concentration occurs, and it stops the entire process. I would like to add a very last addition here. This kind of deviates a little bit from a cold brew, but if you're someone that really does have some of those lighter roasted coffees and love them, if you do have some African coffees with some fruitiness in them and you want to taste them, and you don't mix anything with your coffees, you drink it black typically, there is a method of getting some of that acidity into your cup. And what that is you take some hot water and you pour it over the grinds just before you pour the cold water over the grinds. And that little bit of hot water in the grinds for maybe a minute at tops does a wonderful job of extracting a good amount of acidity and puts it into your cup. And then it lets the very long 10, 12 hours of brew time extract the rest. So those are the techniques that I'm going to show you today. So unlike a normal drip brewer, there's a little bit more math involved now that we have a concentrate. First thing I would like to mention, the brew ratio that I mentioned, 5:1, is by weight. And so a lot of measuring scales and so forth measure in fluid ounces. Well, a fluid ounce is actually roughly 4% different than an ounce in weight when it comes to water. So you got to take that into account with doing the math. The other thing, a lot of people do not have scales for measuring things accurately by weight. So I've organized I have a nice Mr. Coffee scoop. It is almost exactly equivalent to a heaping tablespoon. And tablespoons come in different sizes. I've actually tested both of them. If you heap them up nice and high, it becomes almost a scoop. And my scoop here, I've used different coffees and it holds about 10 grams of coffee. So that's what I use. And then the third thing I'd like to point out is coffee absorbs water by about twice its dry weight. So if I put an ounce of coffee into my coffee brewer, it's going to absorb 2 ounces of water. So you got to keep that in mind, and when you're doing your calculations and you want to end up with a certain amount at the end, you got to take that into account. I would also like to mention I have a tea brewer over here. I don't know if it's an IKEA or something like that. Tea brewers, you'll find out real quickly when you do this math, have a nice filtering mechanism. Looks like it's perfect for cold brews. Well, it really isn't. They hold quite a bit more water than what's required for the amount of coffee. And so it really, that one that I particularly, we checked it out the other day, if you fill the thing completely up with coffee and you put the right amount of water in it, the water doesn't even come up enough to hit the grind at all. So don't go running out and buy a tea brewer. They won't make a cold brew without some serious modifications. And don't tightly pack your coffee. Again, you want to grind it really coarse, and you don't want to pack it into any kind of brewer. So I did some math here, and in this presentation, I told Matt to make a PDF of it and make it available later. So I made a nice table here, whereas if you wanted to end up with an 8-ounce cup of coffee, you're going to need to make a 4-ounce cup of concentrate. In order to do that, you're going to need almost 7 fluid ounces of water and about 4 scoops of coffee. Kind of a lot, huh? For an 8-ounce cup of coffee, using 4 scoops, it's kind of unheard of for a normal drip brew, but that's the kind of coffee consumption that goes on making cold brews. Plan on buying almost twice as much coffee per day if you have a cup of coffee than you did with a drip brew. So this table, it goes all the way up to 48 fluid ounces. That's quite a bit of coffee. and it will be available later. I don't have any of these commercially available brewers. I managed to do by making my own. But if you're not interested in doing yourself, modifying things, you can go out and buy an OXO cold brew system. I've heard it's very good. It works under the almost exact same principles that I got here. There's a Toddy brewer, a Filtron brewer. All three of those brewers make a concentrate, which stops the brew at the right times. They're highly recommended. Drip brewers, you'll see a Yammer and a cold brewer dripper. Those use a completely different method of brewing cold brew. They actually drip water, cold water through your brews, and it's gonna result in a different result. They're not bad. They're more complex. I have actually no experience with them right now. I don't have them. I would like to also mention another company that makes something called a coffee sock. It's really just a sock made out of a very special fabric. It's an excellent made sock. Their method of brewing is throw the coffee in, throw it into a container, and they're not making a concentrate. They're making the final brew, which results in more fluctuations and more variations in your final brew. But you don't have to follow their instructions. You can use their coffee sock and make a concentrated brew. And it's something I would recommend if you want something simple and inexpensive. Okay, so that's it with this. So let's get into some demonstrations. Matt, I wondered if you could switch to cameras. Perfect. As I said before, I have three different ways of brewing I'd like to show you. One is very simply with a French press. French presses can make a concentrate quite easily. You simply pour the grinds either in like you normally brew with a French press, pour your water over it, don't compress it, and put it in the fridge. Another way of doing it with a French press, which I've heard, I haven't tried, is you put the plunger in, not all the way down, put the coffee on top of the plunger, pour your water in, and let it brew with water above and below the coffee that's inside, and that tends to extract a little bit better. But French presses are a very common method of brewing cold brew concentrate. Works quite well. I've done it a few times. This here, as I said earlier, is a tea brewer. I don't know if it came from IKEA or I got it given to me. It came with a variety of different filters and things, attachments. It's totally useless by itself for making a cold brew. But what I did find really helpful, this filter fits perfectly into a 20-ounce cup that I happen to have. And I'm going to make a cold brew with that a little later. It holds the perfect amount of grinds for the amount of volume that I have in this cup for making a concentrate in my refrigerator. I would also like to show you this. This is just made with a yogurt container. Inside I have a coffee sock. It's a cheesecloth just tied up with a string. I've had this in the fridge since about 7 last night, so it's got about 15 something hours of brew time. And this thing on the top has holes in it, so when I want to go and drain the concentrate out of the sock, I put it in here and it just drains. I have it labeled properly, so when I want to duplicate a cold brew, I can just follow the instructions on here, and I know it's going to make a pretty good brew. And I have one in here now, and I can't wait to taste it. So let's get started. I'm going to start by making a coffee in this. And again, it's pretty easy to do. this particular size container, this particular filter, holds, it holds 9 scoops of coffee. So I have ground coffee already over here. I prepared it earlier. Usually I don't grind coffee until I'm ready to drink it, but for the show, I had it all prepared ahead of time. So let me go ahead and put in the 9 scoops. And again, 9 scoops. This is my coffee scoop, which is a heaping tablespoon. I don't want this coffee scoop heaping. 3, 4, 7, 8. I didn't have much extra. 9 scoops. There we go. Right up, almost not quite to the top, but pretty close to it. Now this is an African coffee. It has some acidity, and I want some of the acidity. So I am going to go and put this into my 20-ounce cup, and I already have prepared here some hot water. It's been running for a little while. It's 200 Fahrenheit. And what I want to do is I want to just pour enough over there so that it might just start to drip out of the bottom. And unfortunately, you probably can't see me, but you got to believe me that it's. I'll just put a little bit in there, let it soak in. Probably only an ounce or 2 of coffee. Okay, there it comes out of the bottom. Now I add my cold water. Here, just go ahead and slowly pour it over. And then it will filter everything, and all the hot water will mix with it. I don't want to overfill it and get the grinds into my final brew. And I'm going to fill this thing all the way to the top, which incidentally, I measured it ahead of time. This cup with the grinds and everything in it is going to make about, it's going to take about 16 ounces of water. Oops, I almost filled it over. All right. You can see it bubbling a little bit. It must be pretty fresh coffee. Fresh coffee tends to bubble and foam up. They call it blooming. Okay. Almost there. You can see it's, well, you can't see it as well as I can, but I wish this was clear. It's actually got some darkness to the color already. And that's due to the hot water pre-infusion. All right, there it is. All right, that's ready. Now I typically put this into the refrigerator and let it sit overnight. Somewhere in the 10 to 15 hour range is fine. And that'll make enough concentrate for 2 decent sized cups of coffee in the morning. So I'm going to put it aside. Some people don't put it in the refrigerator. They put it outside in the room temperature. That also works. It brews, it extracts a little quicker that way. I like it cold because I'm pouring it over the ice, and I don't want the cold brew to melt the ice. I like to sip my coffees. So that's as simple as that. Second thing I would like to show you is what happens when it comes out of the refrigerator. Here is a larger batch. This one took well over 20 ounces of water. This will make 3 to 4, somewhere around three decent sized cups of cold brew. And I'm going to go ahead and make myself a cold brew using this setup. Let's see, what size should I have? I'm going to go for a big cup today. I'm thirsty. Let me get my couple supplies. Got myself some ice. Got myself my. I like to put a little bit of milk over the coffee, and I need a measuring cup. Because what I'm going to mix with this is I'm going to put the ice, followed by 6 ounces of the concentrate, And then I'm going to fill it the rest of the way, because this is a 12-ounce glass, with clean cold water and leaving a little bit room for the milk at the end. Let's do that. So first of all, when you have a brewer like this with a cheesecloth, we need to get the concentrate out of the solution. Right there, you can see the bag of cheesecloth is saturated with the brew. And when you pick it up, it takes a little bit of time for all this to drip out of solution. So I have a little rig here that works quite nicely. And dripping, you can let it drip for while you're having breakfast and so forth. This actually drained out quite quickly, actually. Maybe my grinds were coarser than the last time I tried it. The coarser the grinds, the faster it'll drain all the water and concentrate out. And it seems like it's done a pretty reasonable job. I'm going to go ahead and put the ice into my cup. Let's see here. I fill it all the way to the top. You lose a little bit of ice when you pour this in, but not much, because every ingredient that you're putting in here, unlike a hot brew, everything is going in cold. And I can probably sit that for a good half an hour after this. So I fill it right up to the top. Let me go ahead and measure the amount of concentrate. I want to have six ounces. Again, this is nice and dark, so it looks like it extracted quite well. There you go. Pour that in. That supposed to be 50% water. I think so. You mix it 50-50 with water. So a lot of water, as you can tell, just came from the ice. So it looks like I'm going to use very little amount of water, and will melt the ice and give it the right concentration. There it is. That actually is a 50-50 concentration. And again, earlier, some people don't like coffees as dark as I have, but this is really the standard. Pour my milk over it, and it comes up with this beautiful plumes of milk. Some people like to give it a stir afterwards. And I have myself a cold brew. Very good. It's not too strong at all. Excellent. And I can taste a little teeny hint of acidity from the African coffee, but in general, it's very reduced from what I would normally get from a hot brew. This one here, I did use the pre-infusion method to get some of the acidity, and it does. Like I said, it does have some, but a lot of it is reduced compared to a drip brew. That's pretty good. So that's about it for what I thought I'd demonstrate. Maybe we can go back to this camera here. Perfect. And try to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, feel free to write questions in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask Ed directly.
I have a question. When you're differentiating, taking hot coffee and pouring it over ice, what happens if you take hot coffee, chill it, all right, in the refrigerator, and then put it over ice? What do you lose between the cold brew and that system?
That'll probably work very well. It'll melt less of the ice. You'll get more acidity from the coffee. You'll get if you have a nice African coffee that you wanted to preserve some of that acidity, that method will in fact work. because it's cold, it's not melting as much ice, but over time it will end up melting the ice. It will make it a little weaker versus time.
Okay.
So that's probably the only downfall. It's a good way to go as well. I'm not sure. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. But I think the acidity, and you're still dealing with melted ice on it. But yeah, but I was just thinking, if you're trying to do something quick and don't have the time to do the cold brew, which takes some time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think large amounts works great. Yeah.
Well, there's probably one other thing I'd like to mention before I forget. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, and even some of the suppliers that make some of these commercial brewers, that say that you can make this concentrate, put it in the refrigerator for multiple days. I don't feel all that comfortable experimenting with that. I happen to know that even something cold in the refrigerator, if it gets germs in it of any type, will manifest themselves into something that you don't want to drink. I don't find that coffee from the store is all that sanitary. So I'm not going to suggest keeping a concentrate for much longer than the time you're going to drink it. Keeping it overnight is probably long enough, in my opinion, to prevent anything from growing in it. But multiple days kind of gives me the creeps a little bit. I have coffee that comes right off of my roaster. It comes out of the roaster at 420 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's sterile. But much beyond that, the air in the room is pulled through the coffee to cool it. Right there, you might be pulling in some airborne yeasts and other things. Going through a grinder, particularly a grocery store grinder, I don't know when the last time they cleaned it, and I guarantee you they never sanitized it and sterilized it. Sterilizing everything before you go is a lot of work. I thought I'd point that out, as I would not follow some of these manufacturers' suggestions to keeping it for many, many days. Maybe it works. Maybe the concentrate itself prevents things from growing in it, but based on the readings I've done, I'm not sure that's true. Okay, any other questions? No other questions?
It's Athlete Slade again. Not for this, but can I back up to your previous coffee class we had with you and ask you a quick
Yes.
question?
Yes.
I purchased the AeroPress after seeing it, I'm loving it. But can you just tell me again what kind of ground, for how fine the ground should be for that to get the best out of it?
Sure. If you're used to grinding from a coffee shop, a drip grind, you want to go finer than a drip grind. Okay. Somewhere, I mean, people typically go somewhere between an espresso and a drip grind. Okay. It's typically the best for an AeroPress.
Great, thank you.
And if you happen to have a little bit too coarse a grind for an AeroPress, say you have some coffee left over from your drip brewer, you can still extract quite well with it, but you would have to wait a little longer time. The coarser grind, all that does to you is it's slowing down the extraction. And so you just wait a little bit longer and you'll eventually get it all out of it the same way as if it was a finer grind. Maybe agitating it and stirring it a little bit more, if you had too coarse a grind, will extract it better. So those are techniques, and it takes a little bit of getting used to make it a stronger brew, because it didn't extract properly. Yeah.
Maybe people might want to know, or maybe they already know, but we were talking about it before, but do you want to talk about maybe like controlling like the strength of certain brews? Or
Sure. I guess I should go into that a little bit, because it somewhat applies to cold brew. My last presentation, I talked about the importance of time and temperature when you brew coffee. Higher the temperature tends to extract a little quicker. Cooler temperatures extract cooler, or longer rather. finer the grinds you are tends to quicken up the extraction, and coarser grinds tends to slow it down. So with a cold brew, what's going on here is the coarser grinds lengthen the time that you have to have it in contact with the water, the brew time. And also, because it's colder temperatures, it also lengthens it out. So that's why with cold brews, we have to really let it sit there for many hours in order to get all the stuff. And there's also very little agitation going on with a cold brew. The flow of water just doesn't exist in a cold brew. Unless you're getting one of those cold brew drippers that I mentioned, there's no flow at all in most of these cold brews. So getting all the coffee flavors out of it is a struggle for any cold brewer. With a hot brewer, particularly like a drip brewer, there's a flow of water going, continuous flow of fresh water. And water is a solvent. When it doesn't have anything extracted in it yet, it's a very good solvent. And it pulls all the coffee flavors out. You get high extraction. And so you can end up with a very strong brew with a very small amount of coffee. It's kind of the opposite with a cold brew. It takes quite a bit more coffee to end up with a strong brew. But it all works out at the end. Unlike hot brews, if you're way off on the amount of the extractions, it can get pretty not so good tasting. Cold brews have a way of just extracting mainly a lot of the good stuff. A lot of the really harsh bitterness that's in coffees don't come out as well in a cold brew. Some people don't like acidity. I find it tends to balance some of that bitterness and making it sweet. So I like a little bit of acidity, but it's all a preference. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say they don't like acidity. And it all comes out at different times too. A lot of the acidity comes out earlier early in the brew process. And the bitterness tends to come out at the end. And so if you're finding your brews are way too bitter for you, try shortening your brew time. And that might actually make it less bitter. And likewise, if it tends to be too sour and not as sweet and just doesn't have the nice bitter punch that you'd like it to have, try brewing it a little bit longer. And with some of the brew techniques like cold brews and the AeroPress, you have the flexibility of doing that. When you have a drip brewer like this, you don't have a lot of controls. It comes through the coffee at a certain amount of time, and you really can't control that well. So you have to change the water temperature or maybe the grind in order to get there. But you do have those knobs, those few things that you can change and control to change the amount of time and extraction that's going on to dial it right into the sweet spot, which is not bitter and it's not sour. There's a sweet spot somewhere in between. With all brews, cold and hot, you like to get to that sweet spot. Well, I'd also like to mention I've been enjoying lately. Mentioned Matt earlier. I like pulling espressos. It's really easy cleanup for me to just pull an espresso and clean the basket out. There's a lot of people nowadays pouring their espressos over ice and filling it with tonic water. And turns out tonic water with maybe a little bit of water added, with espressos poured over it, mixes really well and makes a very good sweet brew. So if you want to try some experiment with something that works pretty well. Is there any other questions? How are we doing on time, Matt?
It's 10:42.
10:42. Okay.
If there aren't any more questions, we can wrap up. But
yeah, no, I wasn't paying attention to time, and maybe I went a little bit too quick through some of this. But
well, if there's no more, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm just trying to think if there's something else I should mention. No, not really. Sorry.
No, I think you covered quite a lot, and we recorded this so people can watch it on YouTube and go at their own pace if they need to. Later, we'll send out the email as well as Ed's slides. But thank you so much, Ed. This was incredibly informative, and I'm looking forward to making some of my own.
Yeah, it's a hot week this week, so
Yeah.
it's gonna pay off, I think, to experiment with this week.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to supply you with the PDF that has the slides. It has a nice table in there, which has a starting point for the amount of water and the amount of grinds that you should use in each of these. And I encourage people to give it a try. Hopefully, you'll like it. You'll have good success. Yeah.
You have some thanks in the chat, and I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thanking you, Ed, for doing another fabulous coffee program with us.
All right.